Pokémon X and Y. This is going to be a fascinating one. The 6th generation of Pokémon games. The first Pokémon games to be created in 3D. The first to employ a special battle gimmick. And the last games I thought I'd ever be speaking about on this channel. But we'll get to that in a little while. For now, we're going to turn back the years and comb through these games from the very beginning. And see how they hold up. View them with a fresh pair of eyes. So here we go. We are bound for Kalos. This is a retrospective of Pokémon X and Y. I will start by saying that the game lets us loose pretty early on. Maybe it's because I'm freshly off the back of a couple of games with way more handholdy intro sections, but X and Y give you that first little burst of freedom pretty much as soon as you step outside your house. Vanilleville Town is where we begin this adventure, and we're free to have a little amble around the location and talk to a couple of neighbours, before pushing on into the far and wide adventure that awaits. That adventure always begins on Route 1, our first independent steps into the world, the region opening up in front of us, extending its arms to... oh, that's it. I actually laughed out loud when I first ran up this incredibly brief floral corridor of a route. Like, I get it, because we actually go through Route 1 in these games before getting our starter Pokemon. But like, you couldn't have at least added a couple of little zigzags in there to make it feel a bit more adventurous? Would that have been so difficult? They did kind of fix this later on in Sword and Shield though, where we also go down Route 1 without a Pokemon. They segmented and blocked off the tall grass part of the route until we got our starter. So at least they figured it out in the end, I guess. Doesn't help me here though, Game Freak. I want my little Route 1 critters to be on Route 1. After completing the ludicrously short journey, we arrive in AOKCraig Town, where we're acquainted with our little ragtag group for these games. All 4 of them. That definitely needs a dedicated segment in a little while. But this is where we get our starter Pokemon. A choice of Chespin, Fennekin, and Froakie. Now usually it's Fennekin all day every day for me, because Fennekin is actually based on my favourite animal in the whole world, the Fennec Fox. If you have never taken the time to Google image Fennec Fox, I both highly encourage it, but also discourage it if you need to get absolutely anything done today. These things are adorable and I want 12 of them. I went with Froakie this time around though, because I don't think I've ever used a Greninja in a playthrough, and it's such a fan favourite, so I wanted to give it a spin. The early game in Pokémon X and Y is pretty tightly packed, and it doesn't take long to notice that there's a lot of intentional appeals to nostalgia here. Santaloon Forest is very similar to Viridian Forest. You can even find the occasional Pikachu here, just as you could in Viridian Forest. And all within the first hour or two of the game, X and Y hits you with all these nostalgic callbacks to Pokémon Red and Blue. It's like, hey, remember when Snorlax blocked a path and you had to find the Pokeflute to wake it up? Do it again. Remember when you choose a fossil and have it restored in a lab? Do it again. Remember when you picked between Bulbasaur, Charmander and Squirtle? Do it again. Yes, these games give you a second starter Pokemon. I chose Charmander this time around, don't judge me. Important to note that these are all things that are spread throughout Pokémon Red and Blue. But in X and Y, all of this nostalgia bait happens before you get your second gym badge. It's really putting in the work to get those returning players strapped in for the ride. I understand it, I get why they've done it, but it's very transparent is all I'm saying. The early game is packed with familiar beats, and little gifts and other things to not manipulate you, but bombard your brain with constant little nostalgic dopamine hits to lock you in for the long game. All of this is before you have 2 badges. And speaking of which, the Pokemon gyms in these games were a lot of fun. Game Freak were fresh from Black and White and Black 2 White 2, where in my videos on those games, I talked about how much I really liked the gyms there. And it seems like they've carried across a lot into Pokémon X and Y. Thematically, these gyms are very sprightly. They all have very fun puzzles. Sometimes it's kept super simple, and the puzzle is simply navigating the maze to get to the gym leader. But the games still find ways to make them fun and engaging, adding unique little mechanics you don't see anywhere else in the games, like your character swinging from ropes, or scaling an indoor rock climbing frame. The only one I didn't like was the fairy type gym. But that's an issue I have with warp panel puzzles in general, because they aren't really puzzles in my eyes. They're just random trial and error followed up with a memory test once you know where certain panels spit you out. I really liked the idea of having a fossil Pokemon gym. Although I mentioned I did like the climbing frame thing, I feel like theming that gym around ancient fossils would have maybe been a bit cooler. But I'm just being nitpicky there, it was fine. The gym leaders, I feel like most of them are memorable characters. I didn't think so during my first playthrough, but I was probably watching some trash sitcom at the same time and wasn't paying full attention. Ramos is great. Wolfric is exactly the kind of imposing 8th gym leader I like. Viola is super endearing. I swear, all Pokemon need to do is throw a female character with an artistic hobby in the game and I'm like, yep, 10 out of 10 game, next. I'll try not to let that sway my overall review here. Design-wise, these gym leaders are all great. I can't pick any holes there, really. These gyms definitely took advantage of the 3D space in these games. There's a fair bit here that you just most likely wouldn't have been able to do in the earlier games. So I do wonder if any of the gym puzzle ideas here were conceived way before these games were, but only just became possible with the move to 3D graphics. The challenge of the gym leaders is a little low. That's an issue that sort of widens to the game in general as well. It's a pretty easy game. Again though, I'll circle back to the thing I mentioned earlier about roping players back into the series. That little serotonin boost of defeating a gym leader and getting a new badge, it's nice and easy to achieve in these games, and it's a good way to make you want to keep playing. Once you gain your 8 gym badges, you can head on up to the Pokémon League to have your shot at becoming the new champion of the region. Okay, so before we jump into that, Victory Road is a thing pretty much every game had until recently. Sword and Shield didn't have one because the championships took place in the final city. And Scarlet Violet, you enter this cave thinking it could be a Victory Road, and yeah, it just spits you out the other side. Job done, on you go. And I've always had mixed feelings about Victory Road, in that it's usually just a long, multi-floor cave, where you go up some ladders again, down some ladders, and then come back up some more ladders, and after swatting away countless Graveler, eventually emerge on the other side. It's always felt like a test of patience and persistence, rather than what I think it should be, that being a final test of skill. A series of battles that help you gauge whether you're really ready for the Pokemon League. And I think Pokémon X and Y do this maybe the best out of any Pokemon games. I like how it's segmented by having your character step back outside for short periods. We pass by waterfalls and run through old castle ruins. It really helps break up the monotony of roaming through dark cave interiors. And I like the variety of Pokemon the trainers have, which should also be a common thing on Victory Road. It should throw some Pokemon at you that you haven't faced until now, to see if you're prepared enough to deal with whatever curveball may be thrown at you. Also, I love that the guy that lets you through into Victory Road also challenges you to a battle. I'm not even sure why they did that, but it's a funky little quirk. Also, the gates opening to let you in was a very exciting touch. This looks awesome. So yeah, I have a lot of good things to say about Victory Road in X and Y, but what about the Pokemon League itself? I think the Elite Four in Pokemon X and Y are a bit boring. The rooms they're in look fantastic. We need to get back to that in Pokemon games, 100%. Scarlet and Violet's Elite Four setting was abysmal. But the trainers themselves didn't spark much joy for me. I actually forgot to hit record for the battle with Seabold, so you'll just have to trust me in saying that it was the greatest Pokemon battle the games have ever seen. But I guess it's destined to be one of those things where you just had to be there. Sucks to be you guys. The champion Diantha I do like though. Maybe it's partly because we meet her a couple of times throughout the game, before we come to battling her at the very climax of it all, but also design-wise, she looks like royalty. I mean, she has the trainer class Grand Duchess, so she doesn't just look like royalty, she literally is royalty. But yeah, she gives off the aura of someone of a high rank, someone powerful, and so she was a fitting champion for me. The rest of the Elite Four just look like, and give off the energy of, gym leaders. They needed to give a little more for me. But I definitely won't complain overall, because the character design in particular in Pokemon X and Y is on par with the best we've had in Pokemon, in my opinion. Alongside the gym challenge, we of course have the story running through X and Y. I'm going to smush together the story segment and the evil team segment here, because they are inextricably linked. The central plot of Pokemon X and Y is built around this guy, Lysander, whose name I pronounced as Lysandre for longer than I want to admit. The story is quite vague in a lot of places, and at certain points you do find yourself thinking, what are you even yapping about? and it leads to the long exhausted conversations where people will parrot that cliched phrase, "The theme of Pokémon X and Y is beauty," which there are plenty of other people who can articulate far better than I can why that simple statement just does not hold. I highly encourage you to seek those videos out after you're done with this one. But to try and headline news it, Lysander has a deep desire to cleanse and reshape the world. He craves a truly beautiful world, free from greed, resource scarcity, and the general ugliness he sees in society. He thinks that humanity is beyond redemption, and the best way to achieve this beautiful world he's envisioning is to wipe the slate clean. And he's going to do that by harnessing the power of something called the ultimate weapon. He's going to unalive everyone, basically. Lysander heads up a team called Team Flare. They are the antagonist group of these games, and probably the final team that's felt innately villainous in more recent times. But the issue they have is being just so bland. I don't think I felt any development or nuance or internal conflicts with Team Flare. Aesthetically, they look really flamboyant, like there should be some real character here, but their role in these games can be condensed down to trainer battles. They're just trainer battles. Low-ranking fodder that exists only to grind up your Pokemon's levels on your way to Lysander. They're too cookie-cutter for me. I mean, that can work. Idle grunts that are just following the herd works when it's a team like Team Rocket, for example, at the risk of sounding like a Gen 1er, because those grunts are just employed as fodder to wear down any opponents. Team Flare feels like it should be an organisation where each member is relentlessly tied to the cause, but that doesn't happen here. It's all a bit sterile, and I'm not really feeling any suspense or tension. I'm being battled because I'm an intruder, not because there's an overtly apparent clash of motivations or philosophies. So I mentioned this ultimate weapon. What is this ultimate weapon? Well, for that, we're going to take a trip to the past. 3,000 years into the past. A long time ago, there was a man, and a Pokemon, a Floette. When a war started in the Kalos region, that Floette sadly perished. The man built this big machine to bring Floette back to life, and succeeded. He was, however, still incredibly angry at the world for harming it in the first place. So he turned the machine into a mass weapon, and single-handedly ended the war with the devastation it caused. Floette, horrified that so many Pokemon had to perish so that it could live again, left the man. And now Lysander wants to reactivate this ultimate weapon, which lies hidden underground in Geosenge Town, and use it to create his idealized vision of the world. And we have to stop him before he gets the chance to do that. During our journey through Kalos, we have a few brief encounters with a man known as AZ. He's this towering 10-foot tall guy. He's revealed to be a former king of the region 3,000 years ago. He is the man who created the ultimate weapon. And when his Floette left him, as we mentioned earlier, he became an eternally wandering figure for 3,000 years. He's seemingly immortal. It isn't explained fully from what I could gather. His great height is a result of exposure to the ultimate weapon, but why he's still alive 3,000 years later is kinda skimmed over. But I believe that both him and Floette were given eternal life somewhere in the chaos. He still holds the key to the secret weapon, which is why Team Flare hunts him down and locks him in their headquarters. He takes the limelight at the end of the game though, when during our parade in Lumio City, he mysteriously appears, approaches the player, and asks for a battle. And this battle is closure for him. He wants to complete his redemption arc by truly learning what it is to be a Pokemon trainer. Who wins this little exhibition match doesn't matter, and after this battle concludes, AZ's Floette then floats down from the sky in this incredibly poignant moment. After 3,000 years of wandering and reflection and discovery, Floette has seen the light in AZ again, and has finally returned to him. And that's where we close out, creating the Pokemon world equivalent of the "it's been 84 years" meme. It's very ambitious and philosophical, and from that basic synopsis, feels like it should make for a great story. But the execution of it in-game is so weirdly paced alongside everything else, that I feel that a lot of the weight we should be feeling from this narrative, we just don't get to feel. It's too sporadically spread across the game. I like that it goes beyond a simple good versus evil story, Like, it actually tries to give you something a little more cerebral to think about. And my god, the underlying lore and history to this, which can be found across the whole region. There are landmarks and references that tie into the history of Kalos and this war that took place. It's so good. It's there if you really care to go and look for it and properly take the time to soak it in. It's just not front and center enough to make a meaningful impact on the average player. And that's a bit of an issue in my view. But on the other side of that, casual Pokemon fans will enjoy a very smooth ride through these games. The barrier to entry is very low. The region we are traversing in Pokémon X and Y, as we briefly mentioned, is the Kalos region. Kalos is heavily based on the real-life country of France. And immediately there is an added significance to the Kalos region, because it is the first Pokémon region that has been created in 3D. And while X and Y are still top-down style RPGs, and the map still occupies a grid-style space like the older games, we do get a better sense of scale in these games, and a better sense of depth as well. And that's something to get excited about in itself. If I look past that, then I start to get stuck in two minds a little bit more. Because the Kalos region is pretty, it's based on France, France is a pretty country. Well, I suppose it depends on who you ask. But I do think the region suffers from a bit of commonality between a lot of the towns. There are too many towns that lack a solid aesthetic identity for me. And it's a weird one for me to critique because, thematically, the region is very consistent. But maybe it's too consistent? There's a lot of green and a lot of the same kinds of houses. Like 90% of the towns give off the exact same vibes to me. Definitely let me know what your thoughts are on that in the comments. What does make up for that though, is the defining feature of each town. I think every single town in this game has something very unique about it that makes me easily distinguish which one is which. I know that Camphria Town is the one with the big castle at its head. I know that Silage City is the one with the quirky cycling route. And Lumiose City is the one where I don't know where the hell I am. A beautiful segue into talking about how I just cannot get my head around Lumiose City. Turn me into a mouse and position the cheese wherever you like. This is where I perish. I am on first name terms with the Lumicab drivers, because I am their most loyal and desperate customer. Okay, so I don't know if the janky controls for our player character contribute to this at all, but it's definitely a factor. Our player character spins and turns in all sort of disorienting ways in this city, but the city itself doesn't help either. I could be alone in this and everyone else finds their way around just fine, but I just can't wrap my brain around all the different avenues and plazas. I'm just forever getting lost. This video is being recorded before Legends ZA releases, so if you're watching this after that game comes out, please take a minute to drop me a quick welfare check in the comments. I'd appreciate that a lot, thank you. So to sum up, the Kalos region is very distinct. It's probably one of the most aesthetically distinct regions in Pokemon, with the most ambitious capital location for sure. I just think it runs a bit shallow in places, where the shared visuals between some towns are shared a little too vigorously. In fact, while we're here in Lumiose, can I recreate the meme? You know the meme I'm talking about. I'm sorry, there's a blackout. You can't go any farther until it's fixed. Then where the hell's that dude going? Forever funny. Okay, so earlier on I briefly touched on the 4 rivals we have in these games. It sounds like a lot, and it definitely is, but I think we are kinda used to having 3 rival characters now anyway, so it's only one more. The first one is the opposite gendered player character to the one we choose to play as. That'll be either Carlum or Serena. This is our primary rival, the one we'll be battling the most throughout the game. They are the competitive rival personality. Because it's the same dialogue you get with both characters, we don't see a lot of depth to them. They're just there to fulfill that traditional rival role throughout our adventure. Then we have Shauna. Shauna is a very carefree, energetic personality. She's not really about the battling side of Pokemon, although we do battle her the odd time here and there. She's kind of in the game to keep us hyped about our adventure. I think the most memorable moment with Shauna is watching the fireworks with her at the Parfum Palace, which I did during the day, so it looks a little awkward. And she's like, "Oh, I've never watched fireworks with a boy before." What does she say if you're the girl character? Tieno is the insufferable rival. No, I wouldn't go that far. He's definitely a different breed to the other rivals though. Tieno likes to dance, and his goal is to put together a team of Pokemon that can dance in perfect harmony or something like that. He's just always talking about dancing. He was a bit of a comic relief character for me. He just has this silliness about him that you just have to laugh at. Probably my least favourite rival character in the whole franchise, but he has comedy on his side. And finally, Trevor. Trevor is a walking Pokédex checker. Most of my memories of this kid involve him insisting to compare Pokédexes. But he's the numbers guy, the nerdy analytical friend in the group. He kind of reminded me of Kenny from the original Beyblade anime. Similar kind of personality. It's clear that Game Freak has gone for diversity with the rivals in Pokémon X and Y. They've created this dynamic group where each character serves a specific purpose when they interact with the player. They aren't consequential to the story in any way, but like many other aspects of X and Y, they're designed to keep us playing. Callum/Serena makes us want to get stronger, Shauna makes us want to adventure, Tieno makes us want to dance, I guess, and Trevor makes us want to learn and fill the Pokédex. I'm not crazy on these rivals at all, I'll be completely honest, but I get it. It's supposed to emulate that feeling of going on this Pokémon adventure with your friends. I can see why a lot of people would like them a lot. The high number of rival characters wasn't the only new thing that came to the franchise in Pokémon X and Y. These games flipped the script in a couple of other ways too. First of all, we got a new type in Generation 6. The Fairy type was introduced in these games. The first time a new type was introduced since Dark and Steel were added in Gen 2. And as of recording, this is the last time a new type was introduced in Pokémon. If you don't count the Stellaterra type in Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. But that's not really a type, is it? It's just a temporary form where you sort of take on every type for a little bit. VGC players from back then can probably tell you way more about how this shook up the competitive scene. But it was exciting. We got a new evolution to celebrate in Sylveon. One of the legendaries, Xerneas, took on this fairy typing, as well as a bunch of older Pokemon getting retconned with fairy as a second typing. It was good. It provided a much needed bona fide counter to dragon types, other than ice and dragon itself. I wonder if we ever will get another new type. Let me know what you think in the comments. X and Y were also the first games to feature a special transformation gimmick in battle, something that would go on to be a trend in every mainline game since. And this one remains a strong favourite for a lot of people to this day. Mega Evolution. This is a temporary evolution certain Pokemon can take on for the duration of a battle. Massive stats buff, kind of overpowered to be fair, but a lot of them do look pretty cool. Mega Evolution wasn't really my cup of tea for a long time. I like battle gimmicks that every Pokemon can use. It's the reason I love terrestrialization so much in Scarlet and Violet. Mega Evolution can only be used by a very specific group of Pokemon, and because of that, we don't really see much of it during a playthrough of these games. So to Mega Evolve, Pokemon have to hold their unique Mega Stone, and various NPCs throughout the game will give you these Mega Stones if you happen to talk to them. And some are found just glistening in the wild as well. Very easy to miss though, so you've got to really keep a keen eye out for them. But surprisingly to me, not many trainers you come up against use Mega Evolution themselves. No gym leaders use it, none of the Elite Four use it. I only saw it in a couple of instances. Most memorably when the champion Diantha used Mega Gardevoir. I think a lot of people love this mechanic because they see the crazy potential in it, and want to see it built upon, which hopefully it is. And I've definitely grown to appreciate it more in recent times for that very reason. In these games though, it kind of feels like it falls flat. It's hyped up and then barely used. You can easily just forget it's even a thing in X and Y. But this is the gimmick that probably spawned every gimmick since, so we have a lot to thank it for. Another big thing introduced in Pokémon X and Y was character clothing customization. The move to 3D finally gave us the option to customize our character's wardrobe, allowing for a lot of individuality and unique aesthetics. I kinda like the default blue outfit in these games, so I just spiced it up with a different hat. This was huge though, something we'd never been able to do before, and something that's been gradually built on with each generation ever since. Like every Pokemon fan, I've always loved to imagine myself in the Pokemon world, and being able to make my character actually kinda resemble me, that's pretty cool. Some people go the other route and give their character bright green hair and the most ridiculous clothing combinations they can find, which is fun too. And there's so much more here you could dig into. Online features like the player search system, which allows you to interact, battle and trade with friends and other players around the world. Wonder Trade was introduced here. O-powers were something subtly sprinkled into the game. which gave boosts to various things like egg hatching speed and experience points, and you could share those with friends too. Online capabilities spiked up to a whole new level in these games, so they were very significant in that area too. The Pokédex. So the generation before this was sort of a soft reset for the Pokemon franchise. A lot of Pokemon in that generation were kinda counterparts of the OG 151, so it was always going to be interesting to see what the next set of Pokemon were going to be like. 72 new Pokemon were added in X and Y, so not a whole lot, but there were a few highlights for sure. The starters are consistently solid for me. I think Delphox being a fire psychic type was a great choice. Greninja has earned fan favourite status. And Chestnut kinda reminds me of the Digimon Wendigomon. Cool. Then you've got a few form differences in these games. The Vivillon line has so many versions, and which one you can catch depends entirely on the physical location you reside in, making it the hardest Pokemon to collect all forms of. Furfrou has different forms depending on how you choose to style its coat. The Flabébé line has a bunch of colour variations. Floette is the middle evolution here, and AZ's Floette we see in these games is a special form that we ourselves cannot catch. It's never been in any games, and I doubt it ever will be. It's a one-of-a-kind Floette that's been resurrected by the ultimate weapon. It'd be hard to see how they could possibly create a scenario where more of these exist that we can catch. But maybe they'll find some way, I don't know. It does look really cool. The box legendaries are pretty epic. They quite literally symbolize life and death. I mentioned earlier that we got a new evolution in X and Y. As an Eevee fanboy, I hope it isn't the last. There's a lot of cutesy Pokemon in this generation, but I'm not opposed to that. It probably makes sense in a region based on France. Like I said, there weren't a lot of Pokemon added this time around, but the bunch we got, pretty good. I can't say I dislike any of them. Barbaracle is a little cursed, and I'm not really sure what Carbink is supposed to be, but a solid 9 out of 10 Pokédex for the creativity alone. Pokémon X and Y are games that have a lot of potential. They were really significant titles for a bunch of reasons we've gone over in this video. I just don't think they delivered enough in the core experience. Mega Evolution isn't used enough, the evil team was kinda lifeless, and the story and lore of Kalos, while brimming with all this rich history and philosophical overtones, just didn't land as heavily as it should have. But putting that stuff aside and looking at X and Y as a general Pokemon experience, they were comfy games. They were easy games. And that's something a lot of people took issue with. But the way I like to see it, if I was going on holiday and I was just going to be sitting on a beach in the shade of a palm tree for 2 weeks, and I wanted to bring a Pokemon game with me to casually play through while I relax, I'd probably bring Pokemon X or Y. They're incredibly accessible. You get a lot of powerful Pokemon thrown at you. Take your starter Pokemon, your gifted Kanto starter that you can Mega Evolve, the early Snorlax you can catch, the gifted Lucario you can also Mega Evolve. There's 2/3 of a powerhouse team right there without even trying. There is a numbing gleam to Pokemon X and Y. I did find my eyes glazing over a bit as I played through them. They've never been my favourite Pokemon games. In fact, after playing them for the first time, I never thought I'd come back to them again. And I certainly never thought I'd be making a 30-minute long YouTube video on them. But I think they definitely have their place and their purpose in the lineup of mainline games. A lot of the modern mechanics we have in more recent titles have their roots firmly planted in Kalos. And despite all the criticisms I do have for X and Y, they deserve a lot of credit for that. And we'll be going back again in Pokémon Legends ZA, so I'm excited to see what's in store for us there. Don't forget that welfare check, guys. I hope Lumi Cabs haven't gone out of business. I'm going to need them a lot. Drop a like, leave a comment. Comments help a lot, actually. If you don't usually leave comments, do me a favour and comment a random emoji. Like, find the weirdest, most obscure emoji that you've never used before, and just drop it in the comments. It'll make my morning coffee and comment scrolling a lot more fun for a while. Take it easy, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one.